being in a sort of trance. It had happened only a few blocks from the group home, on his way from school. He didn't know he had thrown so many rocks. He couldn't even remember what he'd been thinking about. "I don't know," he said at last. "You don't know," the judge repeated incredulously. Rick tried his best. "It wasn't for any specific reason," he explained. "Not for any reason." The rising cadence of the judge's voice felt ominous. Rick unfolded his arms and put them down by his sides. "Just general frustration, I guess," he managed. The judge looked aside, put his fist to his chin, looked back at Rick. "General frustration is what I'm feeling right now myself," the judge said. "Just this morning over coffee I read about 2 juveniles no older than you bludgeoning a 9-year-old to death with a baseball bat." "So," Rick thought, "what does that have to do with me?" The judge paused. His eyes had drifted, unfocusing, to the floor. "So many with no conscience," he said as if to himself. "A petty offender one day becomes a murderer the next. It didn't used to be like this." The judge's eyes were suddenly back in focus and locked on Rick. "Didn't I tell you just 6 weeks ago that I didn't want to see you in my courtroom ever again?" "Yes," Rick agreed. "Yes, Your Honor," his social worker said under her breath. "Yes, Your Honor." Rick felt so lightheaded he thought he might faint. In the corner of his vision, he was aware of a man in a police uniform coming up the side aisle. It was young Mike Brown, his probation officer, with his trim dark mustache and his face blank like a robot's. "Say you're sorry," Janice Baker whispered. Rick glanced at her. He should have said it himself before this. Now the judge was glaring worse than ever, knowing he'd just been instructed to say he was sorry. He couldn't. Not now. Not when he was being forced to. He had a certain amount of pride. What could the judge do to him anyway? Janice Baker had told him about a place near Lake Tahoe for kids like him who had gotten into a little bit of trouble. It didn't sound so bad, being in the pine trees and the mountains. It couldn't be much worse than the group home he was in now in Reno. The couple running the group home was only doing it for the money. They didn't even care enough to come to court with him. His social worker appealed to Rick with a glance. He shook his head. With a disapproving look at him, Janice Baker rose to her feet. "Please take into account, Your Honor, Rick's background. He's only 14. In the last 4 years, he has lived in foster homes in Fresno, Stockton, Merced, and Sacramento, California, as well as a foster home and a group home here in Reno. During that time, he has been enrolled in 6 different schools. He has never known either of his parents. He was raised by his grandmother, who died when he was 10, leaving him an orphan, completely alone in the world." Rick recoiled at the word orphan. He hated that word. Hated that it even existed. He didn't think people should use it. It made him sound pitiful. The judge peered over his glasses. "His file is right in front of my eyes, Miss Baker." She paused. "Of course, Your Honor." "If you will, Officer Brown," the judge instructed. The probation officer cleared his throat. "I visited Rick 3 times at the group home," he began. "At present, I have 5 kids to check in on there. I've known Rick for only 6 weeks. Haven't got him to talk much. Don't have much of a feel for him." "I understand, Officer Brown. So many of them seem to be bundles of attitude with no substance inside. Nothing they really care about. No conscience, no remorse." Rick wondered if he should say something. Now was the time to at least say he was sorry. But he wasn't sorry. Not really. It was a stupid thing he had done. But it wasn't as if he'd killed somebody. Now it came back to him, how he felt when he was throwing the stones. He was angry. He was angry about ending up in the group home after all his bad luck with the